Besem Ab, World, and Mefeskadus, Adawamla, Amen. Besem Ab, World, and Mefeskadus, Adawamla, Amen. Besem Ab, World, and Mefeskadus, Adawamla, Amen. Yes, good morning again. Seeing some of you already this morning with my other post. And yeah, blessings on the second day of Abbe Sion, the Great Lent Fast. So straight in with the reading, Numbers 33, because it's quite long today. And for context, it's a recap chapter. So it's going to be actually recapping lots of what we've already heard in Leviticus and Numbers. So yeah, just so you understand that it is looking back. Okay, blessed love. These are the journeys of the children of Israel when they went out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the land of Moses and Aaron. Moses wrote the starting points of their journeys by the commandment of Yahweh. These are their journeys according to their starting points. They travelled from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the next day, after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom Yahweh had struck amongst them. Yahweh also executed judgments on their gods. The children of Israel travelled from Ramesses and camped in Succoth. They travelled from Succoth and encamped on Etham, which is in the edge of the wilderness. They travelled from Etham and turned back to Piharoth, which is before Baal and Zephon, and they encamped before Migdol. They travelled before Heroth and crossed through the middle of the sea into the wilderness. They went a 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Etham and encamped in Mirah. They travelled from Mirah and came to Elim. In Elim there were 12 springs of water, 70 palm trees, and they encamped there. They travelled from Elim and encamped by the Red Sea. They travelled from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. They travelled there from the wilderness of Sin and encamped in Dopka. They travelled from Dopka and encamped in Alush. They travelled from Alush and encamped in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. They travelled from Rephidim and encamped in the wilderness of Sinai. They travelled from the wilderness of Sinai, encamped in Kibroth and Hatavah. They travelled from Kibroth and Hatavah and encamped in Hazeroth. They travelled from Hazeroth and encamped in Rithmah. They travelled from Rithmah and encamped in Rimmon Perez. They travelled from Rimmon Perez and encamped in Libnah. They travelled from Libnah and encamped in Rissa. They travelled from Rissa and encamped in Kehelath. Sorry, that's a difficult one. Kehelath, I think it is. They travelled from Kehelath and encamped in Mount Shepher. They travelled from Mount Shepher and encamped in Harada. They travelled from Harada and encamped in Mekheloth. They travelled from Mekheloth and encamped in Tathath. They travelled from Tahath and encamped in Terah. They travelled from Terah and encamped in Mithkah. They travelled from Mithkah and encamped in Hashmono. They travelled from Hashmono and encamped in Moseroth. They travelled from Moseroth and encamped in Ben Jacan. They travelled from Ben Jacan and encamped in Hor Haggidah. They travelled from Hor Haggidah and encamped in Johabath. They travelled from Johabath and encamped in Aborana. They travelled from Arabana and encamped in Ezion Geber. They travelled from Ezion Geber and encamped in Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin. They travelled from Kadesh and encamped in Mount Hor, in the edge of Edom. Aaron the priest went up into Mount Hor at the commandment of Yahweh and died there. In the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the first month, on the first day of the month, Aaron was 123 years old when he died in Mount Hor. The Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the south in the land of Canaan, heard of the coming of the children of Israel. They travelled from Mount Hor and encamped in Zalmanah. They travelled from Zalmanah and encamped in Punon. They travelled from Punon and encamped in Oboth. They travelled from Oboth and encamped in Abarim, in the border of Moab. They travelled from Eam and encamped in Dibon Gad. They travelled from Dibon Gad and encamped in Almon Diblatham. They travelled from Almon Diblatham and encamped in the mountains of Abarim before Nebo. They travelled from the mountains of Abarim and encamped on the plains of Moab by the Jordan of Jericho. They encamped by the Jordan from Beth Jeshimoth even to Abel Shittim in the plains of Moab. Yahweh spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by Jordan and Jericho, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when you pass over the Jordan into Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, destroy all their stone idols, destroy all their molten images, and demolish all their high places. You shall take possession of the land and dwell therein, for I have given the land to you to possess it. You shall inherit the land by lot according to your families. To the larger groups you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the smaller you shall give a smaller inheritance. Wherever the lot falls to any man, that shall be his. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of your land before you, then those you let remain of them will be like pricks in your eyes and thorns on your side. They will harass you in the land in which you dwell. It shall happen that, as I thought to do to them, so I will do to you." For these 3 words I give thanks, bless and love. Yeah, so some difficult names there, so apologies for tripping up. But I thought best to just go with it rather than stopping and re-recording and editing and that sort of stuff. Is just, that some of those are tricky names. Yeah, so with chapters like this, I often think, well, they serve different functions. I mean, they're not the most engaging to kind of read or kind of read into, but I think they're here for certain reasons. One is that they've been on this massive journey, as you've heard, from Mount Sinai up into the Promised Land. So part of it is to recap the experiences of what they've gone through and to acknowledge. It's a pause, it's a reflection, and it's maybe poignant that I'm reading this at the start of Abba Siam, because it is a reflection moment. This is how far we've come. This is what we have to give thanks for. These are what we've endured. This is what we've survived. So it is a reflection point. And also remember, it wasn't the first generations that have now gone into the Promised Land. This is now the second generations. It's only Caleb and Joshua from that first generation that were permitted to enter the Promised Land. So this is also an education for those younger generations to recap what their ancestors have been through or what they fought through. So it very much is a touch and base, and it is a reaffirming of the narrative of all that the children of Israel have endured, and why they then do the certain things that they do in terms of some of their spiritual ritualistic practices. It also serves the function of reiterating in the Bible, in one place, a very detailed account of all the different places they've been to. Most of this is a recap, but there actually is new information in this chapter which doesn't exist earlier. And the new information is actually a lot of those different places that they stopped at, because that's not expanded in the previous chapters. In Exodus, Leviticus, and also in Numbers, it just touches on certain key moments where certain things happen, but by no means does it touch on all these. So this is a recataloguing, if you like, a remapping of all the places that they've gone to, because it's important that they understand the footsteps that they've travelled and endured. I also think with chapters like this, and maybe this is going to sound slightly naive, but when you hear people say, "Oh, yeah, the Bible's just a fiction, it's just a story, it's not, it's just all made up." Actually, I don't think chapters like this would be made up, because it's so detailed and it's so particular, and it doesn't serve any narrative function for the Bible itself. And I know, I don't want to be analysing this from a modern day literary tradition, because, old books like Homer's Odyssey and things like that don't subscribe to a narrative structure and formula that we have today in our kind of writing. But for me, this feels like a very factual account, of, okay, yeah, all the different places and all the different details. It doesn't serve any function for someone to be making this up. But again, that might sound really naive, but I know what I mean when I say it, even if I can't quite articulate it. But so I'll leave that there, really. But as I say, it's a reflection moment, it's a reconfirmation moment, and it's for the people to digest and hear all the experiences they've gone through and literally how far they've travelled, as well as for God to just also, and helping God to just slow down and see, this is what the people have gone through, this is what we have endured, but my nation is now here. So it's a kind of literally a regrouping of the people and a regrouping of the narrative and everything that comes with that culture and that tradition of what's being bringing forward into the promised land. So yes, I will end it here, as I often say. But coming up to the end of the book of Numbers, so that was chapter 33, and it ends on 36. So yeah, coming up to the end of the book of Numbers, and again, we often see these kind of reflection chapters at the end or at the beginning of chapters just to set the context. So yeah, looking forward to tomorrow's reading, God willing, God spare my life, as they say. So have a blessed day, one and all. Whether you're observing or not observing the Great Lent, I just wish you have a great day. Hope it's fruitful, hope it's positive, and yeah, may God shine his glory upon us, and God willing, be back more for tomorrow. Right, give thanks.